Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our weekly Facebook and YouTube live session. I'm Fitra, your host for today. Don't forget to follow us on our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, and also subscribe to our YouTube and also iCapital.biz for investment advice on the go. So do check it out. And during
Not,
the live
not just
session,
investment advice,
Mhm.
maybe any other things that we can talk about. Our opinion, our views, right? For example, why the KLIA is so badly managed, so badly maintained, right? And they keep blaming the equipment. The equipment was not overhauled, was not serviced. They keep blaming the machinery. But the Malaysia airport, the company that manages KLIA, they forgot that if the management of KLIA is good, then the machine and equipment will be good. The equipment and machine is no good, not working properly, is because the management is not doing their job.
True.
It's
That's
that simple, right? So we also have this type of views, this type of comments, right, on what is happening to Malaysia, what's happening to the world, things like that. So it's investment in a very broad sense of the word.
Yeah. So during the live session, if you have any comments, suggestion, or you want to share your thoughts with us, feel free to comment down below as well. So, as today's topic, what has Singapore got that Bangkok, Jakarta, and Kuala Lumpur do not have? So, if you guys have any experience traveling to those countries, you can share your comments, your observation, your
Yeah.
experience, right, with
Yeah.
us. And
Yeah.
how many of you guys have been to Jakarta and Bangkok?
Yeah,
Also
Jakarta
share with us.
or Bangkok or Singapore, right? All of you have been to Kuala
Yeah.
Lumpur, right?
Yeah.
So comment, let
Uh,
us know, right? Whether you've been to these places and when was the last time you went to these places, whether it's Bangkok, Jakarta, or Singapore.
Yeah. So, Tembo, you have been traveling to many places, right, for the past 2 to 3 months to Sydney, Bangkok, Jakarta, and China.
And Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah. And from your observation, what actually that Singapore got that Bangkok, Jakarta, and all those cities do not have?
Okay, let's see whether our viewers have replied and see whether they've been to Bangkok, Jakarta. Because if you have been to Bangkok, Jakarta, Singapore, and so on, then you can visualize what I'm saying a lot better, right? If you have only been to Singapore and you haven't been to Bangkok, Jakarta, or the lower tier cities in China, right? Shanghai, Shenzhen, they are already at world class level. But if you have been to the lower level, like the county level or the provincial capital level, then what I would share with you is something that you can visualize a lot better. Because if you've never been to an area where you can see really poverty, real poverty, where slums, squatters are, where you cannot even get clean water supply, you don't even have proper electricity supply and all that. You can't, we're in KL, we are not as progressive as some of the other cities, but we're not as backward as some of them. So our electricity supply, thanks to TNB, seems to be pretty reliable. But our water supply, no thanks to Air Bekalan Selangor, is always getting disrupted.
Yeah.
Whether it is pipe burst or water chemicals getting into the reservoir in a year, you get so many water disruption, right? But that shouldn't be happening for Malaysia, because we are already having a GDP per capita of about 12,000 US dollars, which is already the upper middle income. So if you've never been to the Bangkoks and the Jakartas or the Manilas and all that, then you cannot imagine what it is like, where all these things that we take for granted don't exist. Right? Clean water or electricity, where in 1 week you get electricity supply only like 3 days, 5 days out of a week, right? Or water, you probably have to go like 1-2 kilometers away to be able to carry them every day. So that kind of condition is hard to explain unless you have actually gone there and see for yourself the condition that these people are in.
So
Yeah.
from FK Chin from Facebook, he comment righteousness is real in Singapore governance. We are working towards that.
Okay.
Maybe it's for Singapore.
Right. But no, the question is whether you have been to Jakarta, whether you've been to Bangkok,
Yeah.
whether you've been to Singapore, or if you've been to Bangkok, Jakarta, only do you only stay at the high-end hotel? Do you only go to the high-end shopping mall, that kind of thing? So if you can share your experience with us, so that when I discuss later, what is it that Singapore has that the other three places do not have, then maybe the implication of what I'm saying will become a lot clearer. Yeah.
Okay. So far, no one's
No
made
one, okay,
comment.
so
Yeah.
nobody has been to Bangkok or Jakarta. Cannot be, right? Because KL to Bangkok is only 2 hours. KL to Jakarta is only 2 hours flight, right? And recently, when I went to Bangkok, the Air Asia, the planes, just by the way, there were so many Air Asia planes in the Bangkok airport. I thought that, wow, they have even landed at the Dong Muang airport. Bangkok has got two. Dong Muang is the older airport, but nearer to city, and the other one is the newer international airport, which I can never pronounce the Thai name. Right. So when we landed at Dong Muang, which is the biggest low cost airport in the world, oh, there's so many Air Asia planes. Incredible! It's like as if I've come back to Malaysia. Right. Anyway,
Okay. Will Wen, Singapore only. He went to Singapore only, much more pedestrian friendly than KL.
oh yeah, Singapore is super pedestrian friendly. I love to walk in Singapore because the cars there, the cars respect the pedestrian. Pedestrian has got more rights than cars in Singapore, and I can walk for example, in the morning from the hotel to the office, which is about 25-30 minutes in the hot sun, carrying my laptop bag, right? And I walk because it's enjoyable. It's clean, it's safe, and a lot more pleasant than just sitting inside the car.
So we have another comment from YouTube. Singapore has clean toilet and well-maintained public park.
Okay, great. That's agreed. Yeah, right.
From Tan Han Boo.
Yeah. But if you go to certain parts of Jakarta, they got decent parks as well. Jakarta, Bangkok, not so many, right? And then if you go to China, of course, China, whether it is Zhengzhou, Shanghai, Beijing, every city in China has got beautiful parks. Beautiful parks, whether small parks or big parks, they're all very nice.
Okay, another comment. Singapore. Most of our viewers went to Singapore.
Yeah.
Singapore has got all the basics right. Singapore government is super efficient and reliable, but Singaporeans, especially younger ones, are generally more complacent.
Okay.
From
Okay.
John Doe.
This is another commenting on Singapore, right? Which what Singapore has and the other places don't have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed. But the rest, if you can share with us whether you've been to, it doesn't have to be Bangkok. It could be Chiang Mai or Songkla or Hat Yai, or it doesn't have to be Jakarta. It could be Medan. It could be Yogyakarta. It could be Surabaya, or Manila, or Ho Chi Minh City.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, this person has been to Bangkok, right? Jakarta, right?
Yeah.
Singapore, right?
Okay, from YouTube viewers, been to Bangkok 5 years ago, but no reason to go to Jakarta.
Okay, from Vince Lim, right? Okay. All right. Now, many of you have said about the clean toilet, the governance, about the cleanliness, right? And the clean parks, right?
Pedestrians, yeah.
Most of you are familiar, or I assume that most of you are living in the Klang Valley. And now it's 2022, 2023. So if you look forward in about, say, 15 years from now, what has happened is the growth in population in Klang Valley has been much faster than Malaysia as a whole. Because, of course, you have the new births and all that, but Klang Valley has been attracting a lot of migrants internal domestic migrants, people who are in Alostar, who bought with Alostar, only thing you can do there is to beat mosquitoes every night, right? So, okay, you come to KL for better work from Pahang, from Kelantan. So KL, the Klang Valley has been attracting a lot of local domestic migrants. So the population growth rate in Klang Valley has been much higher than all the other places in Malaysia. In fact, in some states, in some areas in Malaysia, there's been a decline in population, like Perlis or Kelantan. Because if you are a young Malaysian, you need to have good job opportunities. So they cannot find it there. So they're becoming naturally to the economic center, which is Klang Valley of Malaysia, right? So now, if you do that kind of projection, 15 years from now, projection is different from forecast. Forecast is more short term, and you want to be as accurate as you can. It could be 1 year, 2 years forecast. Projection is where you look at the trends over a long period of time, and you're not so interested into whether you are exactly wrong or exactly correct. All you're interested is in the trend. So if you look at it 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now, the population in Klang Valley will definitely increase at a faster rate than the rest of the country. That's almost a given because all the main, I wouldn't say all, a lot of the economic activities are still focused in the Klang Valley. Klang Valley means KL, right? Petaling Jaya, Subang, Klang, Shah Alam. That's Klang Valley. So it will still be a magnet. And 15 years from now, I think it's fair to say the Klang Valley population now is about 8 to 9 million, not counting foreigners. These are just Malaysians. 15 years from now, I can be pretty sure that the population would be maybe 15 to 20 million, right? Which will be most likely double easily, right? Now, if you imagine Bangkok and Jakarta, the whole metropolitan area, well, depending on how you define, but it's about 18, 20, 25 million. So in 15 years from now, Klang Valley is going to be like larger Bangkok, larger Jakarta in terms of population. Now the question is, will the infrastructure, will our government, whether it's in KL, Subang, PJ, be able to progress in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the facilities in Klang Valley over the next 15 years? Because you're sure population is going to go up, almost reaching the level of Bangkok and Jakarta. Will your roads, right? Are you going to have more potholes? You're going to keep on building more flyovers, flyover, and then fly to nowhere, right? And would you have more water disruption, right? Where you get more people, more factories, and so on and so forth. Maybe more chemicals going into your reservoir, or more pipes that break for no reason. Would you have more flash floods? Because the way our urban planners, our town planners do in Malaysia is they forget that we're in a tropical country. Either because they are not good in designing or because there's corruption or both. So they design things, a lot of times you look at our houses, you got 6,000 square feet land. For example, you're building a bungalow, right? 7,000 square feet. And the whole 7,000 all filled out with concrete, all cement. What is wrong with that? From an environmental point of view, you are contributing to environmental problem because when you cement up for your whatever reasons, right, and instead of having grass, then there's no water runoff. And the water runs off in a different direction. So you disturb water flow and you disturb the terrain. So our urban planners, our town planners, I think they're living in a world where rain doesn't exist and erosion doesn't exist and those stuff doesn't exist. So think of that where your traffic jam will get worse because population is going to get more than double. Water supply disruption is going to get worse, right? And flash floods. I don't know. By then, 50 years from now, MRT. MRT now is great. It's like I shared before, our KL Klang Valley MRT is almost world class. But if you look at KLIA, built in 1988, which was launched in 1998, which was 25 years ago. When it was launched in 1998, it was world class, like Hong Kong Airport, right? 25 years later, KLIA is like what? No, it's not an international airport anymore. So your MRT now, by 15 years from now, will it have the same experience as your KLIA, where this one break down, this one disruption, or I got to shut down for 6 months and so on and so forth. By then, your population is double. So imagine that kind of scenario, right? So that's why I asked whether you guys have been to Bangkok or Jakarta, because for you to imagine what KL is like 15, 20 years from now, go to Bangkok, go to Jakarta. It is there now. The future KL could be there. So I went Bangkok, and surprisingly, because the traffic jam is supposed to be famous in Bangkok, right? So I was there for 4 days. Most of the time, it didn't take me that long. But there was one night when I went for dinner to a riverfront, the Asiatic mall. The traffic took 2 hours just to reach the dinner place. 2 hours, right? And then along the way, from where I was staying to the riverfront, you could see that yes, there are certain small areas like you got the Central Embassy, which is a high-end super mall where your Hermes, your Zara, your Gucci are all found. Once you get out of that 2 hours, most of the time you're looking at areas which are more squatter type, which are poor. Some of the streets, which is in the center of Bangkok, is dark. There are no street lights, right? And then when you get next to Asiatic, right, which is the popular tourist place, right, by the riverside, just next to Asiatic, you see a lot of not just shops selling cannabis, weed, but a lot of poor areas. That's, for example, Bangkok, right? And then the same thing in Jakarta. High end, the big hotel, the Mandarin Oriental, the Grand Indonesian Plaza, and all those things. And then once you go out, my goodness, some of the streets are not even lorong. Some of them are so small. The so-called street, and you can see that these are either squatters or slums, and more so in Jakarta, where you stop at traffic light or stop certain places, people come and sell you all kinds of things just to, which we are already seeing in KL in the last few years, right? A traffic jam, people will come and sell you their nasi and so on and so forth. In the case of Jakarta, the things that they're selling a lot more, and they could sell you all kinds of stuff, or sometimes the woman will carry a small child and just beg for money. Right? So the disparity of wealth and income in Bangkok, Jakarta, and in Kuala Lumpur is extreme. So my point is that 15 years from now, that disparity in Klang Valley will get worse, and the living condition for most of the people in Klang Valley will worsen. So you want to see what it is like 15 years from now for Klang Valley, visit some of the poorer areas in Bangkok. And the famous slum in Bangkok, there's one part of Bangkok where there's a railway line that cuts through. The railway track cuts through your whole slum area. So the railway line is next to your house. So can you imagine KTM, the railway line is next to your house, right? So in the case of Jakarta, the disparity is there. So my question is, if you look at Singapore, for those of you who have been to Singapore, right, you talk about the clean toilets, the public parks, and so on and so forth. But in 1960s and even towards the early 70s, Singapore is like KL now, Singapore is like Bangkok, Singapore is like Jakarta. Singapore has got its slums, Singapore has got its squatters. There are a lot of areas of Singapore that were very poor. When I went to Singapore in 1972 or 73, I wanted to go to People's Park. People's Park is like a famous complex in Singapore. It's like next to Chinatown of Singapore. And my local Singapore friends say, no, it's not safe for you to go to People's Park. It's filled with gangsters, and Even the Singapore police dare not even go to People's Park because the gangsters are even more powerful than the police. That is Singapore in the 60s and the 70s. So the question is, what is it that Singapore has that is allowed them to get out of this condition? Whereas Bangkok, Jakarta are still stuck, and KL is heading towards the direction of Bangkok and Jakarta. Right? So you might say, whatever it is, right? The one thing that Singapore has, which Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia doesn't have, is Land Acquisition Act. The Land Acquisition Act, which means it's an act, it's a law passed by the government that allows the government to acquire any land for public interest, for public purposes. In fact, let's say if you own a land in Kampung Baru, for example, KL, the government, if it's a Singaporean, has the power to go and acquire the land to use it for public purposes. Malaysia also has got Land Acquisition Act, also the same. What is the difference? In the case of Singapore, when they introduced the act in 1966, it didn't really work. Lee Kuan Yew couldn't achieve what he wanted. So then they amended the act in 1973, whereby the Singapore government is able to acquire your land at cost price. So that means if you bought your land in Kampung Baru 20 years ago, now let's say you bought it at say 100,000, now it's worth 2 million. You based on the Land Acquisition Act in Malaysia, I have to pay you, the government has to pay you 2 million. Singapore government says no, I'll pay you 200,000.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, this Land Acquisition Act, which was amended in 1973, allowed the Singapore government to do that. What first thing is, you all may say that the Singapore government did something that is illegal, that the land acquisition was against principles of property rights. You're right. Hey, don't forget, Lee Kuan Yew is a super well qualified law graduate. He got double first class honors from Cambridge University in law. So he knows what legal property rights are. And he says, yes, when I do all this type of acquisition, I'm going against the British concept of property rights. But my reasoning is this, Lee Kuan Yew's reasoning. You're the landowner, you buy the land in Kampung Baru, you just leave it there vacant. The country develops, the country grows. Your land becomes more valuable. You, as the person who owns that vacant land, did you do anything to contribute to the growth of the country? Nothing. If you didn't contribute to the growth of the country, why should you benefit from the growth of the country?
Makes sense.
Right? So that is more of a socialist type of concept, which is against the British legal property rights concept. So it's like, let's amend this act. I will acquire, even though the Acquisition Act goes against certain British property rights principles, because I'm looking at national development. I'm looking at development for public interest. So as a result of this acquisition, of this change in acquisition, Singapore government by 1985, right? The amendment was 1973. By 1985, the Singapore government owns 3/4 of the land in Singapore, about 76%. It sounds like China, isn't it, right? In China, you cannot own the land privately. I mean, you can own, but only for a certain short period of time. You cannot own perpetually. So the ultimate landowner in China is the Chinese government. So in 1985, the Singapore government owns 3/4 of the land in Singapore, based on the amendment to the acquisition. Now, what did they do? Because I'm able to buy land not at high price, right? I'm able to buy land which is affordable to the country. They use the land to do two things: to build public housing, which is under the Housing Development Board, and also to build affordable industrial estates. That means able to provide industrial land to foreign direct investors at cheaper and affordable prices. So that's how Jurong Industrial Park was born. And then because there are other reasons like other tax incentives and so on. But one of the major reasons why Singapore is able to get out of this slum, squatter type of development where uh, a big chunk of the residents are living in poor condition is because of this act that enabled the Singapore government to buy this land, build affordable housing estate, affordable houses that I can sell to the normal Singapore citizens at affordable prices. By 1990, right, Singapore was able to achieve an 88% house ownership. That means almost every Singaporean owns a house or an apartment because they were sold at affordable prices. And the Singapore government, just because I'm selling you at affordable prices, Singapore government makes sure that the public housing has got a certain level of quality that I don't sell you cheap and I therefore give you lousy quality. The Singapore public housing is not only affordable, it's good quality. In fact, some of them are even better than the private apartments in Malaysia. So, can Bangkok, Thailand, Indonesia, Jakarta, and Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, can we do that? We can't because we don't have this land acquisition act which allows the government to buy this type of vacant land, this type of unused land at affordable prices, affordable to the government. So that's why you see, like Kampung Baru in KL, for example, it's stuck because the private ownership laws don't allow the government to do certain things. Of course, when you have the Land Acquisition Act like Singapore, you got to be careful, right? Because the government can also, if the government is not clean, if the government is corrupted, if they don't have proper governance, of course, the government can make use of it and benefit their crony politicians, right? But that's a separate issue. The first thing is we cannot get rid of this type of things. So you see in KL, in Klang Valley, right? A lot of them just sit on their vacant land. Then what happens? Then when you sit on your vacant land, you don't do anything, your supply of properties. When you control supply and the demand goes up, then prices go up. For example, it's one of the reasons, not the only reason. It's complicated, but land cost is a major cost in urban development. So Bangkok is going to be stuck because Bangkok has got, if you notice, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand have so-called democratic governments, right? In the case of Thailand, the election is out already. You got the Move Forward Party, and then you got the Thaksin's Daughters Party. Nobody can be strong enough. Nobody has won enough votes to be able to name the prime minister. If you cannot do that, how are you going to introduce a law, a land acquisition act that all the opposition people can exploit and block you? So the poor will still be stuck at that kind of horrible condition, and then the wealthy will get wealthier, and then the city and more people comes in, and you cannot develop the city properly, then the condition doesn't improve. The same thing happened in Indonesia, and the same thing happened in Malaysia. Can you? If you're going to introduce such a law in Malaysia, I can tell you those people who are powerful, got vested interest, will definitely block this type of amendment. So then, as the population of Klang Valley doubles, infrastructure goes down. You can see the future of KL. You can see the future of Klang Valley, unless something fundamentally change. But looking at the political situation that we have, something fundamentally will change, but I'm not sure if it will change in the correct direction, whether it will change in a positive sense. So the same thing happens in Manila. Manila, the gap between the poor and the rich in Manila itself is terrible. You have super rich. Like in Jakarta, you got the Four Seasons residents, private residents managed by Four Seasons, which are really 5-star, 6-star one, and then next to it could be a very poor area. Same thing in Bangkok, same thing in KL. But to bring China in, because I went to China recently, right? I went to this city in Fujian, Nan'an, which is in terms of the ranking of city, is a county level city, right? You have got municipalities like Shanghai, Beijing, which is the highest, which is tier 1+, which is at the high end already. So on the other extreme is a city like Nan'an, which is at the lowest rung of a city. I don't see this extreme in Nan'an. I don't see this kind of super rich and a few of the rich one, and then majority of them living in poor condition. Because my relatives in Nan'an are not the well off, they're just the normal people, right? They got clean water, they got clean electricity, internet. Their phone is really 5G.
Wow.
And I was staying, like I said previously, I stayed in a super cheap hotel, 185 renminbi, which is only about 100 ringgit. That hotel's got 5G internet. And that is at the lowest level city in China, because Chinese government has the same concept, the same philosophy as Lee Kuan Yew. Xi Jinping will always say, housing is for living, housing is not for speculation. Like the developers, when you want to build, it's not for you to go and speculate. It's not for you to go and buy 5 houses, 8 houses, 6 houses, so that you can just hold them and then hope that the price go up and then you sell a profit. No, it's for people to live in. So that's why when you go to, of course, when you go to Shanghai and all that, Shanghai is even more pedestrian friendly than Singapore. It's incredible. So when you go to all these type of cities, and I've gone to Shanghai, which is at the highest end, to Nan'an, which is at the low end, the disparity that you see in Bangkok and Jakarta doesn't exist. There are no slums in China. Just like now Singapore 50, 60 years ago, a lot of slums, a lot of squatters. Now Singapore has solved that problem. And a major thing that the Singapore government has, is the land acquisition. Of course, they have changed the act again already, because as a Singapore, the economy develops and all, you cannot still have the same type of principle. They've changed it. But the one major reason why they're able to achieve growth with not such extreme inequalities, and they're able to achieve growth and development, so that the urbanization, you see, urbanization is a very loaded word. If you don't do it properly, yeah, India also got urbanization. Mumbai got a lot of very high-end areas. In Delhi has got also. But then you move out of that. Oh my goodness. You can stay in a super luxurious Hyatt hotel, and then you come out. Oh, you don't even have clean water. Just like in Bangkok when I was there a few weeks ago, right? Next to this Central Embassy. Central Embassy is a very high end, it's the highest end shopping mall in Bangkok. Just outside the Central Embassy, you see this homeless guy doing his job on the pavement.
Really?
Yeah, my staff even took a photo of him, but luckily from the back.
Okay.
So that is what it is like now. So my question is, what is going to happen to Klang Valley? I'm worried that because of the political instability, the poor urban planning, nobody bothers to do proper urban planning, nobody bothers to do town planning properly. They just want to build more highways. Why? Because when you construct highways, flyovers, you get a lot of opportunities for under table money. I mean, you build a park. How much a park will cost? A few million? You just grow grass and trees only, right? But when I build flyover, wow, concrete, cement cost lah, this cost lah, right? A flyover can cost 300 million. I get just 10%. You build a park for 30 million, tak ada duit lah. Right? So something is wrong with our incentive structure. Something is wrong with ours, means Malaysia, our incentive structure. Something is wrong with our governance structure. Something is fundamentally wrong with the political structure. And unfortunately, Klang Valley will remain as the most attractive magnet for urbanization. Whether it is KL, Subang Jaya, PJ, or Klang Valley, or Klang or Shah Alam, I don't see how we can come out of this negative trend.
Okay, and then we got a question from Wai Chun. Do you think the future Singapore government can maintain or improve of the current standing of?
Say again, say again.
Do you think the future Singapore government
Hmm.
can maintain or
Hmm.
improve
Hmm.
on the current standing of living in Singapore?
Hmm.
Because the past leaders have
Hmm.
set a very high standing of governance.
If you compare Singapore now and the past, I think it has changed. Singapore in the past was a very authoritarian type of democracy, right? What the senior leaders, Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, and so on, so on, say, decided that's correct, then the rest will follow. That environment in Singapore has changed because now the Singapore has got a stronger opposition side, whether it's Workers' Party or whatever it is. So to win in the election, the PAP government has to be a bit more populist than in the past, right? But compare with what is done in Indonesia or Malaysia and Thailand, the Singapore government is still, in terms of governance standard, is still a lot better than in these other countries. But if you compare Singapore now with, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago, the times have changed. Now, the important thing is whether the younger Singapore generation, because they have not seen what Singapore was like. If you're born in 2000, 1999, you're born in a modern Singapore, you're born in a successful Singapore. But they didn't see what Geylang River. Geylang River used to be as smelly as our Sungai Gombak, our Sungai, all the dirty rivers in KL. It's as bad as that. But they didn't see that. So they would have taken the condition, the success of Singapore for granted. And therefore, okay, they have a certain type attitude, a ten-timer attitude where I don't have to work so hard anymore, I don't have to sacrifice so more, I'm really entitled to this, the Singapore government owes me a living. I'm not sure I'm not sure how the Singapore government is going to manage that. Right? If the normal Singaporeans in the next general election can give PAP more or less the same mandate, then probably that new negative trend will not dilute the governance standard in Singapore. But if the opposition side suddenly win a lot more seats, then for PAP to stay in power, they have no choice. They have to do a lot more things that may not be for long-term interest, but that could be for shorter-term interest. So a lot depends on the younger generation in Singapore, which I'm worried lah, because the younger generations in Singapore uh, does not know what hard work is.
Yeah,
I
same goes to KL.
agree.
Uh-uh.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they don't realize that Singapore succeeded because of the hard work, the sacrifices. You know, the Economic Development Board, which is something like our MINDA, they wrote a book which I thought was excellent. Hard work, not HARD, but HEART, hard work. Because EDB was set up a long time ago to help bring foreign direct investments into Singapore, right? And that time, nobody had the experience. No Singaporeans had the experience. All of them were inexperienced. So EDB was set up with a lot of fresh graduates. But what they had at the time, I mean, many of them wrote in this book, contributed to this book, is that they have hard work. That means not only are they willing to work hard, they work for very long hours at government's civil servant salary, but more importantly, they put their heart into it. They put a lot of sacrifices into it, and make sure that the foreign investors are convinced to come and invest in Singapore. So if you want the book, it's called Hard Work by the ex staff of Economic Development Board, and explains to you how difficult it was for them to be able to fly over. Remember this Singapore where the gangsters were dominating People's Park, where the Geylang River was as smelly as dirty, and in the 60s Singapore had racial riots, right? So imagine that Singapore, right, and they had to go to Europe, America to convince the foreign multinationals to invest in Singapore. So you must have people who are willing to sacrifice for the country. So I'm not sure whether the environment in Singapore has definitely changed, but to what extent? If it's just a few young Singaporeans thinking like that, then that's not serious. But if the majority of young Singaporeans think that, well, great, we don't have to work so hard anymore, we're entitled to good living and all that, then that is worrying because it will affect the election results.
Okay, now let's change to other city. Boon have been to HCMC, Ho Chi Minh
Ho Chi Minh.
City, Hanoi and Manila for work recently. Never like it. You can see the city area is vibrant, but outside the city is different world. The gap is huge.
Yes, I agree with you, Boon. I mean, I also been to all the cities that you mentioned, and if anyone of us has a social conscience, if you like the excitement that the shopping areas Bangkok can produce or Jakarta, but at the same time, you can see poverty right in front of your eyes. Right, when I was in Jakarta, right in front of the Grand Indonesia Plaza, which is next to the Grand Hyatt Hotel, that was about 10 o'clock at night. You can see there are hawkers there still doing business, working so hard at 10 p.m. And I mean, it was like in the middle of the main street, their hawker stalls were there. But in Malaysia, where I got at 10 o'clock, all the hawkers also gone to sleep already. But their level of income, their level of poverty is so bad that they got no choice. And anywhere you go, you see in the back lane, in the main street, all kinds of stalls selling whatever they can sell. Yes.
Vince Lim commented, what do you think of future growth in Johor due to its close proximity to Singapore and scarcity of land in sport?
Yeah, Johor is an unusual situation. Johor wants to be like the Shenzhen of Malaysia. But then they forget that Shenzhen is part of China and Johor is part of Malaysia. So Johor Bahru or Johor can never be the Shenzhen of Malaysia, right? If we can be 10% of Shenzhen, I think that would be already great. Now, the other thing that you have to bear in mind is that Singapore can do this partly because there's only the Singapore government. In Malaysia, under our legal system, when it comes to land matters, it belongs to the state government, not the central government. So let's say your land is not in Kampung Baru, KL, right? Let's say your land is in Ulu Langat, Selangor. You got this nice piece of land and you want to build whatever it is. So you want to do a conversion, ubah syarat, you want to make it from kebun to say commercial building, you have to apply the approval to the Selangor state government, which has an executive committee. Then they look and see, whether they do the job properly or not, I don't know, right? But then you go through a process, and then they say, okay, I approve your conversion from kebun to say kediaman or perniagaan or commercial. And then if it's housing development, then they say a plot ratio of maybe 6:1 or something like that. So those are within the power of the state government and the executive committee under the Menteri Besar's office, right? So then the question is, that's where the governance comes in, that's where the cleanliness and the corruption comes in. Right? You bought this land for so cheap, you know that if you can convert it into property development or kediaman or perniagaan, you're going to be rich, even though you don't have to do anything. Your land is still empty, vacant land, but you just change the syarat, you just change the condition from, say, kebun, right, getah, right, to something else. Immediately, the value of your land shoots up. Maybe, let's say, previously it was only 200,000 worth. Because you did the conversion, it could be worth 5 million, 3 million. So then, I mean, this is where the structure, the incentives comes in. Okay, hey, you want to ubah syarat, you want to convert, right? Okay lah, let's cerita sikit lah. Right? Let's talk a bit lah, huh? Right? How much you willing to give? So then the whole thing about town planning, urban planning is thrown away because the approval is not dependent on proper town planning and urban planning principles anymore. It's based, approval is based on how much I can get from you. So Johor Bahru, I mean Johor generally, there are benefits flowing from being near to Singapore, of course, because Singapore government, since the Singapore people goes to Johor to keep on buying, eating, stealing your petrol and so on, and allowing businesses to profit. But at the same time, it brings up certain cost of living. So the thing now is, Singapore, especially Johor Bahru and Singapore, is going to get more and more closely integrated through more connectivity. Good and bad. The bad thing is that a lot more Johorians can work in Singapore easily, which means Johor Bahru, Johor area is going to get the employers, the businesses in that area is going to face severe competition from the Singaporeans. Right, and now it's even worse. Now it's 3.4 to 1. Right, the Sing dollar to Malaysia ringgit now 3.4 to 1. So I can work as a security guard person. I can work as a whatever it is, delivery in Singapore. I get 2,000 Sing. I'm really super rich.
Yeah.
So pros and cons, and the gap between Johor and Singapore over the years will widen. The development standards, the quality of life, the gap will worsen. Unfortunately, that's my prediction.
Okay. FK Chin commented also Singapore with
No natural resources.
no natural resources invest much in human capital development, including talent acquisition and its retention. Their efforts include sourcing the best of the best brains from ASEAN and even from China and India. The ASEAN scholars is one example.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree with you, FK Chin. Right, they attract the best talents, but you know that kind of strategy is not the monopoly of the Singapore government. Why can't we attract the best talent? I mean, are you saying that the potential, the living potential, the growth potential, and the living standards in Malaysia are not attractive enough? If they're not attractive enough, why is it that we're not doing something about it? So the question is, if the Singapore government can use such a strategy to overcome their obstacles and their weaknesses and achieve success, Thailand can do the same thing, Indonesia can do the same thing, Malaysia can do the same thing. And in fact, a lot of the Westerners love Thailand, especially Phuket and all that, right? A lot of the foreigners love Bali, but they go there and dance naked in front of the temple. So the question is, why aren't these countries having a policy, a socio-economic policy that will attract local or foreign talents? Now that is partly because of democracy. Because if you attract foreign talents, these foreign talents must be able to produce benefits, longer-term benefits for the country. Can they do that or not? And then it becomes the chicken and egg situation. Singapore government is able to attract foreign talent. The foreign talent is not the only reason why Singapore is able to succeed, because these foreign talents are able to make use of a good workforce in Singapore, a skilled workforce in Singapore, because they are well educated. You bring in the best semiconductor company in the world to come to Malaysia. You bring in the best semiconductor manufacturer in Malaysia, right? Can they succeed in Malaysia? No, because we don't have the talent. Our education system doesn't produce the engineers, the mathematician that can be employed by this world-class semiconductor company. So it is not just attracting the foreign talent. It's just not just putting fertilizer. You put fertilizer in, but your soil is ready koya. Then how the fertilizer also cannot work, right? So you put fertilizer in, but your soil condition must be appropriate, must be suitable. Our soil is don't know what kind of soil we have. Right. So it's the same thing for Thailand and Indonesia.
Okay, and then Vince Lim at Jakarta will be moving to Borneo in 15 years' time. Will we see the same problems as described? They have chance to start afresh. Is that-
Good. Wing Slim, they are moving. They are already building their new capital called Nusantara.
in Borneo.
Yeah, in Kalimantan.
Oh.
Yeah, they call it Kalimantan.
Okay.
The Nusantara will be huge. It will be 3 times the size of Singapore. The whole of Singapore, Nusantara will be 3 times that size. Right. So that is, Malaysia, we don't have that alternative anymore because we got Putrajaya. Our Putrajaya was supposed to relieve the congestion in KL. But thanks to the 4th Prime Minister, the 7th Prime Minister, who wants to be the future Prime Minister, Putrajaya became, I don't know what. Everything he does always ends up in a failure. So we really make use of that strategy and it hasn't worked. Right? So we have to think of something else. Now, we spend a lot of money in Putrajaya. A lot. But it hasn't got that attraction that it should have. Nusantara is going to be now. It's good that you bring up this Nusantara thing because actually now there's no direct flight. You've got to go to Balikpapan, and then you got to drive along the forest and all. So it takes the accessibility now is still no good because it's still just early stages. Now, what I want to share with you is the difference that our government has compared with Singapore. It was last week or 2 weeks ago. There was a huge delegation from Singapore that went to Nusantara to be able to work with the Indonesian government, right, to contribute and benefit from the development of Nusantara. The delegation was from Singapore, was large, and the Indonesian government was so welcoming. I mean, was encouraging them so much because to fly to Nusantara, there's no flight. You have to fly from Singapore to Jakarta, Jakarta to Balikpapan, and then go up, right? So because the Indonesian government wants their Nusantara project to succeed so much that they gave the Singapore delegation special treatment. The flight was able to fly directly from Singapore to Balikpapan, directly, special privilege, and they were treated there. And then the Nusantara, I think, is going to cost something like 40 or 50 billion US dollars. So Singapore has really got a head start. Their architects, their whoever it is, their property developers has got a head start. So coming back to Vince Lim, where Malaysia can use that approach, we have already exhausted that without success.
Okay, and then ZZ commented, what do you think on Penang overall development? Will it become like Singapore?
No way, no way, no way.
No way.
Yeah, no way. Partly because of political reasons, right? And also, Penang actually, if you look at Penang, not just as a Penang Island, but also on the mainland, on the province Wellesley, Batu side, actually, it's really got huge potential. It's really supposed to be Pearl of the Orient, and for many people who go to Penang, usually you go to the usual area, but if you can go to areas which are not so hot with the tourists, like the Balik Pulau area, and then drive around the other island, the other part of the Penang Island, right, where it faces the Straits of Malacca. It's actually a very nice drive. Right? And then along the way, you can find some small durian farms and you can stop there, you know. But will Penang be like Singapore? Politically, it'll be very difficult. I mean, now you can see the Kedah Menteri Besar says that actually Penang is part of Kedah. So politically, there's going to be a lot of obstacles that will block. Right? Penang has got a lot of talent. USM is a good university, right? UUM in Kedah is a good university for more the business and all that, right? So in terms of talent pool, Penang has the potential. Unfortunately, in the case of Singapore, you only have Singapore, the central government, right? In Penang, you got the state government, you got the federal government. And in the past, they wanted to be able to, Penang state government wanted to be able to build a new airport for Penang, not in Kulim, but in Penang. But of course, the central government at that time was different. They wanted to build the new airport in Kulim, which doesn't make sense. You know, you have got Bayang Lepas and you got Kulim. Why would you want to have two international airports so close to one another? And Kulim, who's going to make use of the international airport? But they cannot support the enlargement, the expansion of the international airport in Bayang Lepas because it's under opposition. Right? So the politics at the state level and the federal level has a lot of roles to play in preventing Penang from unlocking its huge potential. Right? Like I said, the now at least you have state government in Penang and federal government in Penang on the same level. So the thing now is, the other approach that Penang can do is you have to go back to the time of Lim Chong Yu. Lim Chong Yu was in the late 60s and early 70s. He was part of Gerakan. He was in the opposition side. Right? Gerakan was like the DAP of last time. But you see, Lim Chong Yu was one of the, if not the best chief minister Penang has ever had. He's able to think so far. His strategic vision is so far ahead that he can say, look, let's work together. And also the federal government in Malaysia at that time also wanted to work together. And bring Gerakan into the Barisan at that time. And then Lim Chong Yu he's a doctor, he's not an economist, but he's got such smart ideas. He's able to set up the free trade zones in Penang, which attracted all the electronic factories to come and establish the Motorola at that time in Penang. And that actually, together with Sungai Way in Klang Valley, Sungai Way in KL and Penang, the Bangladesh Free Trade Zone, were the beginning of our journey into the semiconductor industry. But you have a person like Lim Chong Yu, who's on opposition side, can work together with the federal government, convince the federal government, look, this is for the benefit of the country, not just for Penang, and therefore you allow free trade zones to be set up and attract a lot of FDIs, electronic particularly into Penang. And that, up to now, that was in the early 70s, 50 odd years later, that is the success of Penang. You take that away, there's nothing to the Penang economy, except got some tourism and all that. But tourism is a low value add type of activity. Manufacturing can be high value add. So that's why you need politicians in Penang and at the federal level who can think beyond just the narrow shorter term interests. Do we have that in Penang at the moment? I don't see that coming. I don't see anyone coming like that. Right? But the advantage that Penang has now is that the federal and the state government are from the same side. So they must make use of that as fast as possible. But the other thing is it can create backlash. Right? Because Penang Island mainly Chinese dominated, right? So they'll accuse the federal government that you're more pro-Chinese. And already you can see Muhyiddin and the fourth prime minister and the past coming up with the Malay agenda already. So that will come in and prevent Penang, unless you have a chief minister, like I said, like Lim Chong Yu, who can cross these type of obstacles and go beyond it and achieve state and national objectives.
So Temu, we are getting more and more comments and questions. Let's move on. From Law Kentun, if I look at Sarawak, the government has plenty of lands. What they did over the last few decades, they gave away to cronies for development, and now there is residential property in Kuching is as expensive as KL. Even our houses become 60 years leasehold plan.
Agreed, Mr. Law. I totally agreed. Sarawak itself is as big as Peninsular Malaysia. You tahu tak? Tak tahu. Yeah, most people don't know.
Yeah.
One Sarawak state is equivalent to Perlis, Kedah, Penang, Perak, Selangor, Negeri Sembilan, Melaka, Johor, Pahang, Kelantan, Terengganu. Combined all is one Sarawak. That's how big Sarawak is. That's how much potential Sarawak has. And Mr. Law is right. Because what to do? Sarawak was under a super corrupted chief minister before, who benefited his own family. Right? And then the rest, I mean, it's politics in Malaysia. So sometimes I talk to people who are from Sarawak. I said, you're the locals, whether you are Malanaus or whatever it is, why don't you vote them out? He says, Teng Boo, you don't realize when you go down to the countryside, when you go to the longhouses, right, and you tell them all these things, and then when it comes to election, if the opposition, if the government side can come out and give you 100 ringgit, they'll vote for the government with 100 ringgit. He says that's the reality at that level. So how are you going to get a better government to come in? I said, yeah, I agree with you because I'm not Sarawakian, so I talked to people who are born there, who live there and all that. He said, look, it's fine on paper that in the past, in fact, I mean, you look at it factually, Malays as in Melayu, right, has only a small percentage of the population and the votes in Sarawak. About 30%, used to be about 30% Chinese. And then a lot of it were the local natives. So actually, if the local natives and the Chinese worked together, they could have had huge majority in Sarawak. But then how can I work together? And then the federal government based in KL had a different agenda. A lot of the royalty from oil and gas flow to the federal government, not to the state government. And at that time, the state government, at that time they could use a lot of timber concessions, which was worth a lot of money. If you have a state as big as the whole of West Malaysia, Peninsular Malaysia, imagine how many timber concession, forest concession you can give, and from there, how much you can make. But unfortunately, they did not really implement policies that will lift up the whole state. Sarawak has got, like Sabah, has got a lot of potential. You've got some of the best tourists. I mean, your caves, your Mulu caves, your Nia caves are world class. And then you got your music festival, which is almost world class music festival. Of course, Sarawak doesn't have beaches that is nice as Terengganu and Kelantan, but you got other resources, and then of course you have oil and gas. But I mean, I can understand, I sympathize with what Mr. Law says, that you have this cronyism, you have this money politics that prevents a lot of countries from developing. So this is interesting because Singapore, South Korea, and even Japan, or even Taiwan, were able to develop because they were not democratic. Not in the sense of the Western liberal democracy. Korea really laid the foundation, really took off when Park Chung-hee was a former general from the South Korean army. He was as authoritarian, as dictatorial as you can find. But he was thinking of the country's future. So he'll give certain licenses and all that to the Samsung, to the Hyundai, to all those family. But he was smart. You're smarter than Malaysia's fourth Prime Minister. He said, look, I'll give you this license, but you must achieve certain level of exports. If let's say I give you a license that you can generate $1 of domestic sales, you must be able to generate $1 of export sales. Our fourth Prime Minister, okay, I give you all the license, whether it's gaming, or whatever it is, never mind, don't benefit the country, never mind. So Park Chun-hee was an ex-general. Chiang Kai-shek, military man. The son Chiang Ching-kuo was also a military man, was very authoritarian. There were a lot of abuse of human rights. Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew is as authoritarian as you can get, even though he was popularly elected. That's why Singapore has got things like no chewing gum, hair of guys cannot touch the collar, cosmopolitan is banned, right? That kind of stuff. And Japan, you think Japan is democratic? No, Japan was under an imperial structure. It's on the surface democratic, but that's only. The grandfather of Shinzo Abe was a war criminal. He was tried and found to be a war criminal, but when Americans came in, somehow or other, I don't know how come a war criminal was released and became the Prime Minister of Japan. So you look at all these countries which are democratic. Thailand cannot. Indonesia, very democratic. India, very democratic. Brazil, South Africa, all democratic. But in the wrong way. So the same thing when it comes to Sarawak, and at least now Sabah and Sarawak are trying to regain some of their powers that they were promised back in 1963. There are certain powers. That's why now you don't call our friend as chief minister in Sarawak, you call him premier. Right? Not prime minister, premier. It's like Australia. Yeah, the Australian prime minister, but New South Wales and Victoria, they are called premier. So now Sarawak says the chief minister is a premier. It's not like Menteri Besar or Ketua Menteri anymore. It's premier already. So there's certain more autonomy given to Sabah and Sarawak. But can they translate that autonomy to benefits for the normal Sarawakians? I'm still, maybe I'm too cynical. I'm really 69 years old. I've seen all these promises and always never deliver. I'm too cynical. I hope the government in Sarawak does something for the ordinary people in Sarawak, because that state, together with Sabah, should be a very successful area. Very successful. But it is not.
Okay, so last two questions. Okay, Mr. Tan, do you encourage Singaporeans to purchase properties in JB?
From
Samantan.
Samantha.
Samantha.
Okay. Do I encourage Singaporeans? Depends. If you're a true Singaporean, born in Singapore, bred in Singapore, then maybe no. If you're half Singaporean, but actually you're a real Malaysian who migrated there, then what to do? You got relatives in Malaysia, Johor, right? So, from an economic point of view, if you're a private property developer, you say yes, allow the Singaporeans to come and buy because I can sell more houses at higher prices, I can make more money. If you're the ordinary wage earner in Johor, you say, how can? I cannot compete, ma. My salary is 5,000 ringgit, right? Their salary is 5,000 Sing dollar, right? How can I compare and buy the same property? So, from a national point of view, from the point of view of the development of Johor as a state, I would allow them, but with a lot of conditions that maybe they can only buy the really high-end type of properties, and maybe it can only be the apartments type, not the landed types and all that. So preferences must still be given to the Johorians because they are the people of Johor.
Okay, and last one from Patrick Loh Si San. Do you think JB will benefit when the connectivity improve with the completion of RTL link to Singapore, as traveling between the two cities will take only 5 minutes? As like in China, good connectivity is the key for the rapid development here.
Okay, you have two scenarios. One scenario is where Johor Bahru especially gets more and more integrated with Singapore. Another scenario is where Johor Bahru and Singapore are totally distinct, right? Between these two, I suppose the more Johor Bahru gets integrated in Singapore, it will benefit compared with the scenario where Johor Bahru is totally distinct from Singapore. That's because our Malaysian government, the central government, has not been able to uh, sustain the economic development in Johor over many decades. So if the Malaysian central government cannot do it, then you let Singapore government does it lah, which means that you got more integrated, right? But the integration can, can be exploited in the sense that it can be seen from a racial point of view, right? But assuming you take that racial point of view away, then of course, if the connectivity between JP and Singapore is improved, then of course the businesses in Johor Bahru will benefit, right? And the people in Johor Bahru can work. More people in Johor Bahru can work in Singapore, but at the same time, the Singapore government has got a different policy now. They have a policy where they are encouraging, they're emphasizing local Singaporeans for employment and opportunities, and they still attract global talents, but they are lifting the bar. In other words, if you are like not Richard Branson is not welcome in Singapore because he's in favor of the LGBT, whereas Singapore government has got a different approach. But if you are like the richest man from New Zealand, Richard Challenger, right? Yeah, of course, he's welcome there. Or if you are some entrepreneur, tech entrepreneur from India, from China, of course. So that policy that the strategy Singapore government is that they don't want just any foreigner to come in. It has to be at the higher end, at the more the talent or able to bring in more businesses to the Singapore economy. So now you'll find that the monetary level for S-Pass and E-Pass, the Singapore government has been raising it over the years. And from what I know, it's going to be raised again. That means you want to employ a foreigner, the lowest salary must be like 7,000 Sing. Now, if I'm a Singapore business or employer, if I'm going to hire a foreigner with 7,000 Sing, I have to ask what I'm getting in return, right? Or what are the locals that can be the alternatives? So Singapore government is moving in that direction where they know that Singapore has got limited size. They cannot just afford to attract any foreigner. You'll be skewed towards the more talent type, and therefore your salary will have to be higher and higher. So I think this year, next year, the Singapore government most likely will increase the minimum salary for hiring foreigners.
So, last one, Wai Chun commented on the land that we talked before. Just now, the land that they can acquire has already been acquired, and in addition,
Which land is that?
the Singapore land that you mentioned about the law.
Ah, yeah.
And she adds the population growth and increase in imported labor will need more housing. And related to that, Vince Lim also asked, does Seoul have the same problem?
No, this is different. There, one is Singapore, one is Seoul. Seoul is
Yeah.
South Korea.
Yeah.
So in the
Yeah,
case of
that's-
Singapore, that's why to answer Wei Chun, that's why they know that they got limited land space, and that's why they are not just allowing any foreigners to come in. Right? They have gone past that stage already. So they only want a certain quality type of foreigners. That's why they keep increasing the minimum income, minimum wage for foreigners, so that you cannot just have a fresh graduate coming in out. So you're looking at maybe at 7,000-8,000 Sing dollar, you're looking at almost C level or junior C level already. So it's not so easy anymore. So can you show the question again? Yeah. So they are not just going to have any kind of imported labor, which Malaysia should be doing. Malaysia is just allowing any foreigner to come in, especially the low wage, low skill to come in. And the more we have, the thinking is that the more, if you listen to the restaurant operators and the groceries and the retailers, the more foreigners we have, the better it is. We can do business. It's nonsense because you allow this type of low skill, low wage foreigners to come in, then you trap the economy at the low end of services or manufacturing. You can never move high end, and we cannot move high end. Then your improvement in standard of living will not happen. You're always trapped at that lower end. So Singapore government, they realized this a long, long time ago. So the uh, inflow of foreigners in Singapore will be very selective.
Okay. And Dasso has the same problem.
Okay, by same problem, I guess
From Vince Lim.
Vinci is talking about the slum squatter thing. Not as bad as Bangkok and Jakarta, not as bad as KL, but Seoul has not achieved the same level of achievement as Singapore or the major cities in China. So the disparity is still there. Yeah.
Okay. So that's all for today. Thank you, Tango, and thank you, everyone.
Sure or not? There seems to be a lot of questions. Yeah. Okay.
Already, yeah. So thank you, everyone, for watching this live. If you have any suggestion for us to cover in our upcoming Facebook and YouTube live, so you can
So
suggest.
so my takeaway is this, all right. The thing that Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia doesn't have specifically is this Land Acquisition Act, which Singapore has a long time ago, right? And that has enabled the Singapore government to implement a lot of socio-economic policies that benefited the country as a whole. Because the Land Acquisition Act that Malaysia has is from the British times, and that will benefit only those who keep hoarding land. When you keep hoarding land, then the country gets retarded. The development cannot flow down to the masses. So that is one key takeaway from this morning's live session.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tango. Till we meet again for the next live session.
And please suggest any topics that you want, any topics that you want us to discuss, please.
Yeah, true. Please suggest you can send your suggestion through Facebook, YouTube, or WhatsApp. So thank you, everyone. Happy weekend.
Okay, bye bye.